This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Ever wondered about the secret life of exempted establishments under the EPF scheme? It's a world of regulations, audits, and a whole lot of paperwork, you know?
Yeah, it's more than paperwork. It's about making sure workers get what they deserve, you know?
So we're diving into this SOP, a detailed guide on how it all works. It's pretty intense.
Think of it as the rule book for a very specific game, a really complicated one.
And today we're breaking down the rules. Wish us luck. Let's start with the basics. What's the deal with getting an exemption in the first place?
Well, establishments want to manage their own provident funds, basically. They create their own trust.
Right. But there's a catch, right? It's not a free-for-all.
Exactly. They have to meet some pretty strict conditions. The benefits for employees can't be worse than what EPFO offers. It's a high bar.
So it's all about making sure workers aren't cheated. These conditions, they sound pretty comprehensive. What are some key highlights?
Oh man, there are a lot. Setting up a board of trustees, regular meetings, making sure all eligible employees are members, timely contributions, and proper investments. It's a lot to keep track of.
And what about the investments? Sounds like a minefield.
It is. They have to follow a strict investment pattern, mostly government securities, and there are penalties for not following the rules. Big ones.
So who are the key players in this whole exemption game?
The establishment itself, the Board of Trustees, the regional office, the zonal office, and head office, each has its own responsibilities. It's a whole chain of command.
And what's the regional office's role? They seem to be the real workhorses.
They are. They're the ones doing the on-the-ground checks, compliance audits, and making sure everything runs smoothly. They're the gatekeepers, for sure.
Let's talk about the actual process. What does an establishment have to do to get an exemption?
It's a multi-step process. They apply, provide a ton of documentation, and then it goes through various levels of approval. It takes time.
And what happens if something goes wrong? What if an establishment doesn't meet the conditions?
That's where the cancellation process comes in. It's a serious matter, and there are clear procedures for that too. It's not fun.
What are some reasons for cancellation?
Non-compliance with the conditions, financial troubles, or even changes in the establishment's legal status. It's all about protecting the workers, ultimately.
And what happens when an exemption is canceled?
The establishment has to transfer all the funds back to the EPFO. It's a big deal.
There's also the option of surrendering an exemption, right?
Yes, it's a voluntary action. Sometimes establishments decide it's easier to let EPFO handle things. Less headache.
Makes sense. Less hassle, less risk. Audits seem to be a big part of this. What's the difference between a compliance audit and a third-party audit?
Compliance audits are done annually by EPFO to check for violations. Third-party audits are done when needed, often for a more in-depth look, more thorough.
So it's a system of checks and balances. Important. This whole system has a pretty complex governance structure. Who's in charge of what?
It's a multi-layered system with the head office at the top, then zonal offices, and finally regional offices. The Central Board of Trustees also plays a key role. It's hierarchical.
And the Exempted Establishments Committee, what's their role?
They advise the Central Board on policy matters related to exempted establishments. They're the advisors.
How does EPFU keep track of all this? It sounds like a huge undertaking.
They use a combination of online monitoring tools, compliance audits, and regular reporting. It's a continuous process. Always watching.
And what about the online performance evaluator?
That's a key tool. It scores establishments based on various parameters, helping identify potential problems early on. Proactive.
This whole thing has strict timelines. What are some key deadlines establishments need to meet?
Monthly contributions, annual returns, and audit reports all have specific deadlines. Missing them can have consequences. Serious consequences.
And finally, all this paperwork. What forms and templates are involved?
Oh boy, there are many. Forms for applications, audits, reports, and more. It's a pretty expensive system. Lots of paperwork.
So it's a complex system, but it's all designed to protect workers' rights and ensure the smooth functioning of these exempted establishments.
Exactly. It's a balance between allowed flexibility and maintaining oversight. A delicate balance.
That was a great discussion. Thanks for shedding light on this intricate world. I needed that.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more.
Welcome to today's discussion. We're diving into the Employees Provident Fund Organization's Exemption Division Manual, a comprehensive guide for navigating the complexities of EPF exemptions. It's a dense document, but our guest is here to help us unpack it.
The manual aims to standardize procedures, ensuring transparency and efficiency in handling exemption cases. It's a significant step towards better service for all stakeholders.
Exactly. Let's start with the basics. What are the different types of EPF exemptions covered in the manual?
Primarily, there's exemption for the entire establishment, exemption for a specific class of employees, and exemption for individual employees. The Social Security Code of 2020 introduces further nuances, including provisions for startups.
Right. And what are the key conditions an establishment must meet to qualify for exemption? The core condition is that the benefits offered by the establishment's own provident fund must be at least as favorable as those provided under the standard EPF scheme. This includes contribution rates, interest rates, and withdrawal/advance provisions. The manual details 31 specific conditions in Appendix A of Para 27AA of the EPF scheme.
I see. So it's not just about matching the minimum requirements, it's about ensuring employee benefits aren't compromised. Let's talk about the process. Who are the key players involved in granting an exemption?
The process involves several stakeholders. The establishment itself initiates the application, providing detailed information and documentation. The regional office, or RO, scrutinizes the application, verifying the benefits and compliance. The zonal office, or ZO, then evaluates the proposal and forwards it to the head office, or HO.
And what's the role of the head office?
The HO's Exemption Division assesses the proposal, presents it to the Exempted Establishments Committee, or EEC, and then to the Central Board of Trustees, or CBT, for final recommendations to the appropriate government. The appropriate government then issues the final notification.
So it's a multi-stage process with checks and balances at each level. What about the ongoing regulation and management of exempted establishments once the exemption is granted?
The manual outlines a robust monitoring system. The RO conducts regular compliance audits, scrutinizes online returns, and monitors the establishment's performance using an online evaluation system. The ZO and HO also play oversight roles, ensuring adherence to regulations and providing guidance.
Right. And what happens if an exempted establishment fails to comply with the conditions?
Non-compliance can lead to cancellation of the exemption. The manual details the trigger points, including consistent losses, capital erosion, and changes in the establishment's legal status. The process involves show cause notices, investigations, and ultimately a decision by the appropriate government. There's also the option of voluntary surrender of exemption.
The manual also covers the surrender of exemption, a voluntary process where an establishment relinquishes its exemption. What's involved in that?
Surrender involves a formal application from the establishment, a third-party audit of the trust fund, and the transfer of past accumulations to EPFO. The process is designed to ensure a smooth transition and protect employee benefits.
The manual emphasizes the importance of timely actions and clear responsibilities for all stakeholders. What are some of the key timelines outlined?
The manual provides detailed timelines for each stage of the exemption process, from application submission to final notification. These timelines aim to streamline the process and ensure efficient decision-making. There are specific timeframes for audits, responses to notices, and the transfer of funds.
The manual also discusses the role of third-party audit and compliance audits. What's the difference?
Third-party audits are conducted periodically to assess the financial health of the trust fund, while compliance audits verify the establishment's adherence to the conditions of exemption. Both are crucial for ensuring accountability and protecting employee interests.
The manual also includes a section on the governance structure. Can you elaborate on that?
The governance structure involves a hierarchical system, with the head office exemption division coordinating with zonal and regional offices. The EEC and CDT play crucial roles in reviewing and approving exemption-related decisions.
The manual also highlights the importance of capacity building and information dissemination. How does that work?
The EPFO is committed to training its staff and educating stakeholders on the intricacies of EPF exemptions. This includes training programs for EPFO personnel and workshops for exempted establishment trustees.
Finally, the manual includes a section on handling court cases. What are some of the key legal considerations?
The manual provides guidance on preparing counter affidavits and legal arguments in cases challenging exemption decisions. It emphasizes that exemption is a privilege, not a right, and that the primary concern is protecting employee benefits. The manual references several key court cases that have shaped the interpretation of exemption laws.
The manual seems to be a comprehensive resource for all stakeholders involved in the EPF exemption process. What are your final thoughts on its significance?
The Exemption Division Manual is a crucial tool for promoting transparency, efficiency, and consistency in the administration of EPF exemptions. It provides a clear framework for all stakeholders, ensuring that the interests of employees are protected while maintaining a fair and efficient system.
It certainly seems like a valuable resource for navigating the complexities of EPF exemptions. Thank you for this discussion. This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion. We'll be exploring the complexities of the Employees Provident Fund Organization (EPFO) exemption scheme based on several technical papers detailing its processes. These papers cover everything from applying for exemption to managing and potentially canceling it. What's the overall goal of this EPF exemption system?
The EPF exemption system aims to allow certain establishments to manage their own provident funds for employees, provided they offer benefits at least as good as or better than the standard EPF scheme. It's a balance between allowing flexibility for some employers and ensuring employee protection.
So it's not just about letting companies avoid EPFO, it's about ensuring employees aren't disadvantaged.
Exactly. The core principle is that employees in exempted establishments should receive benefits that are at least as favorable as those under the standard EPF scheme. EPFO's role is to monitor this and ensure compliance.
One paper details the process of applying for exemption. What are the key steps an establishment needs to take?
An establishment must submit a comprehensive application, including detailed trust rules, a comparison of benefits offered versus the standard EPF scheme, and undertakings to comply with various conditions. This application goes through a multi-stage review process involving regional and zonal offices, and ultimately the Central Board of Trustees.
That sounds quite rigorous. What are some of the key conditions an establishment must meet to be granted exemption?
There are many conditions covering areas like the constitution and operation of the Board of Trustees, investment policies, member services, including claim settlements and grievance redressal, and regular reporting and audits. These conditions are designed to protect employee interests.
Another paper focuses on the ongoing regulation and management of exempted establishments. How does EPFO monitor compliance?
EPFO uses a multi-pronged approach. This includes regular online return filings, a performance evaluation system that scores establishments on various parameters, and annual compliance audits. Third-party audits of trust accounts may also be conducted.
What happens if an exempted establishment fails to comply with the conditions?
Non-compliance can lead to a range of actions, from warnings and directive to rectify deficiencies to the ultimate cancellation of the exemption. The severity of the response depends on the nature and frequency of the violations. A priority matrix helps determine the appropriate action.
Can you elaborate on this priority matrix?
The priority matrix categorizes violations based on their severity. Some violations automatically trigger cancellation, while others allow for rectification before cancellation is considered. The frequency of violations also plays a role.
What's the process for canceling an exemption?
It involves a show cause notice to the establishment, an opportunity to respond, and a multi-stage review process similar to the exemption application process. Ultimately, the appropriate government makes the final decision.
Is there a way for an establishment to voluntarily give up its exemption?
Yes, an establishment can surrender its exemption. This involves a specific process, including transferring all past accumulations to EPFO and undergoing a third-party audit.
What are the roles of the different EPFO offices, regional, zonal, and head office in this entire process?
Regional offices are responsible for initial scrutiny, compliance audits, and initiating cancellation or surrender proceedings. Zonal offices monitor regional offices and forward proposals to the head office. The head office oversees the entire process, liaises with the Central Board of Trustees and the appropriate government, and ensures consistency across all offices.
The papers mention past accumulations. What does that refer to?
Past accumulations, PA, refer to the total provident fund balance accumulated by employees in the exempted establishment's trust before the exemption is canceled or surrendered. These funds must be transferred to EPFO upon cancellation or surrender.
These papers seem to emphasize the importance of protecting employee interests. How is that reflected in the system?
The entire system, from the conditions of exemption to the cancellation process, is designed to ensure that employees don't lose out on their provident fund benefits simply because their employer chose to manage the fund independently. The rigorous monitoring and compliance mechanisms are key to this.
Let's shift our focus to a different paper, this one outlining a standard operating procedure for granting EPF exemptions. What's the main purpose of this SOP?
The SOP standardizes the process for examining exemption applications, ensuring consistency and timeliness. It clarifies roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders, from the establishment applying for exemption to the EPFO's head office.
The SOP mentions several forms. What's their purpose?
The forms are used to collect information at each stage of the process. They help ensure that all necessary information is gathered and that the application is complete.
The SOP emphasizes timelines. Why is that important?
Timelines are crucial for efficient processing of applications and for ensuring that decisions are made in a timely manner. Delays can cause significant inconvenience to both employers and employees.
What are the responsibilities of the regional office overall in this process?
The RO receives the application, conducts initial scrutiny, and forwards it to the zonal office with recommendations. They play a political role in ensuring the completeness of the application and verifying the information provided.
And what about the zonal office, VO?
The ZO reviews the RO's recommendations and forwards the proposal to the head office. They also have the authority to grant certain relaxations.
What's the role of the head office, HO?
The HO evaluates the proposal, presents it to the Exempted Establishments Committee, EEC, and ultimately forwards the CBT's recommendations to the appropriate government for a final decision.
The SOP mentions the Exempted Establishments Committee, EEC. What is that?
The EEC is a committee that reviews exemption proposals and provides recommendations to the Central Board of Trustees. It plays a key role in ensuring that decisions are made in a consistent and informed manner.
The SOP includes a section on monitoring. How was the process monitored?
Monitoring happens at all levels, R, ZO, and HO, through regular reviews and reports. This helps identify bottlenecks and ensure that the process is running smoothly.
The SOP also mentions a priority matrix. Is that the same as the one discussed in the previous paper?
While the concept is similar, the specific details might differ slightly depending on the context, granting versus canceling exemptions. Both aim to prioritize actions based on the severity of violations.
This SOP seems very detailed. Is it intended to replace previous instructions?
Yes, this FOP supersedes all previous instructions and circulars on the subject. This is to ensure consistency and clarity in the process.
The SOP mentions several internal and external references. What's their significance?
The references provide context and legal backing for the procedures outlined in the SOP. They help clarify any ambiguities and ensure that the process is legally sound.
What's the overall impact of having such a detailed SOP?
A well-defined SOP improves transparency, efficiency, and consistency in the grant of EPF exemptions, ultimately benefiting both employers and employees.
This paper presents another SOP, this time focusing on the compliance requirements for already exempted establishments. What's the main difference between this SOP and the previous one?
Previous SOP dealt with the application for exemption. This SOP outlines the ongoing responsibilities and compliance requirements for establishments that have already been granted exemption.
What are some of the key compliance requirements highlighted in this SOP?
The SOP emphasizes regular online return filings, adherence to investment guidelines, timely claim settlements, and regular audits, both compliance audits by EPFO and third-party audits of the trust's accounts.
The SOP mentions a priority matrix for handling violations. How does it work in this context?
The priority matrix categorizes violations based on their severity and frequency, guiding EPFO's response. Some violations lead to immediate cancellation of exemption, while others allow for rectification. The SOP details the responsibilities of various EPFO offices in monitoring compliance. How does this differ from the previous SOP? While the overall structure is similar, this SOP emphasizes the ongoing monitoring and enforcement aspects. Regional offices conduct compliant audits, zonal offices monitor regional performance, and the head office provides overall oversight.
The SOP provides timelines for various activities. Why are these important?
Timelines are crucial for ensuring timely compliance and for preventing delays that could negatively impact employees.
What are the key differences in the responsibilities of the establishment and the Board of Trustees?
The establishment is responsible for overall compliance, including remitting contributions, paying inspection charges, and ensuring member services. The BOT is responsible for managing the trust fund, investing the money, and maintaining accurate accounts.
The SOP mentions an online performance evaluation system. How does that work?
The system scores exempted establishments on various parameters, such as timely fund transfers, investment performance, and claim settlement. This provides a quantitative measure of compliance.
What are the consequences of poor performance in this evaluation system?
Poor performance can trigger warnings, directives to improve, and ultimately, cancellation of the exemption.
The SOP also discusses third-party audits. What's their purpose?
Third-party audits provide an independent assessment of the trust's financial health and compliance with investment guidelines. They are conducted periodically or when deemed necessary by EPFO.
This SOP seems to be quite comprehensive. What's the overall goal of having such a detailed document?
The goal is to provide a clear and standardized framework for managing and regulating exempted establishments, ensuring consistent compliance, and protecting employee interests.
The SOP includes a section on internal and external references. What's their purpose?
These references provide legal and procedural context, ensuring that the SOP aligns with existing laws and regulations.
What's the significance of the change history section?
The change history section tracks modifications to the SOP over time, ensuring that everyone is working with the most up-to-date version.
This manual provides a comprehensive overview of the EPFO exemption division. What's its main purpose?
The manual serves as a centralized resource for all stakeholders involved involved in the EPFO exemption process. It aims to improve transparency, consistency, and efficiency.
The manual covers several key areas. What are they?
The manual covers the grant of exemption, regulation, and management of exempted establishments, cancellation of exemption, surrender of exemption, third-party audits, and the overall governance structure.
The manual provides a historical overview of the EPF exemption system. What are some key milestones?
Key milestones include the initial introduction of exemption provisions, amendments expanding the scope of exemption, the introduction of conditions of exemption, and the recent development of procedures for voluntary surrender of exemption.
The manual defines several key terms. Why is this important?
Clear definitions ensure that everyone involved understands the terminology and avoids confusion.
The manual details the process of granting exemption. What are the key steps?
The process involves an application from the establishment, scrutiny by EPFO offices, review by the EEC and CBT, and ultimately a decision by the appropriate government.
The manual emphasizes the conditions of exemption. What's their significance?
The conditions are crucial for ensuring that employees in exempted establishments receive benefits comparable to those under the standard EPF scheme.
The manual describes the regulation and management of exempted establishments. How does EPFO ensure compliance?
EPFO uses online returns, performance evaluation, compliance audits, and third-party audits to monitor compliance.
The manual outlines the process for canceling an exemption. What triggers this process?
Exemption cancellation can be triggered by various factors, including non-compliance with the conditions of exemption, financial distress of the establishment, or a change in the establishment's legal status.
The manual also covers the voluntary surrender of exemption. What's the process?
A voluntary surrender involves a formal application from the establishment, transfer of past accumulations to EPFO, and a third-party audit.
The manual discusses third-party and compliance audits. What's the difference?
Compliance audits are conducted by EPFO to assess the establishment's adherence to the conditions of exemption. Third-party audits provide an independent assessment of the trust's financial health.
The manual describes the governance structure for managing the exemption system. What are the key components?
The governance structure involves the head office exemption division, the EEC, the CBT, zonal offices, and regional offices. Each has specific roles and responsibilities.
The manual includes a matrix of timelines. Why is this important?
The timelines help ensure that the various processes are completed efficiently and in a timely manner.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. So we're diving into the world of employee provident funds, a topic that might sound a bit dry, but trust me, it gets interesting. We're looking at a standard operating procedure, a real-world guide on how things work.
Exactly. It's all about how they cancel PF exemptions for companies. Sounds boring, I know, but it's actually a fascinating look at regulation and employee protection.
Canceling exemptions, what triggers that? Is it like if a company suddenly starts breakdancing in the office? Haha.
I'm not quite breakdancing, but close. Think financial irregularities, not meeting contribution requirements, or even just major changes in the company structure.
So it's not just about the money, but also about making sure the system stays fair for everyone involved, right? Right, let's start with the basics. What's the overall goal of this SOP?
To standardize the process of canceling PF exemptions, it makes sure everyone follows the same rules no matter where they are. It's about consistency and fairness, you see.
So it's like a rule book for canceling exemptions, ensuring a smooth process?
Precisely. It outlines the steps, the documents needed, and the timelines involved. Think of it as a well-oiled machine for handling these cancellations.
And who does this SOP affect? Is it the big companies?
No, it covers all stakeholders. The companies themselves, the regional offices that oversee them, the zonal offices, and even the head office. It's a comprehensive approach.
So everyone's on the same page, using the same terminology?
Exactly. That's why they define key terms like appropriate government, CBT, and compliance audit. No room for misinterpretations.
What are the main legal grounds for canceling these exemptions?
Primarily Section 17 of the EPF Act. It spells out the conditions under which an exemption can be revoked. It's the legal backbone of the whole process.
And who's responsible for making sure everything happens according to the rules?
It's a team effort. The establishment itself has responsibilities like reporting changes. Then you have the regional, zonal, and head offices, each with their own roles in the process.
So it's a bit like a relay race, each office passing the baton to the next?
Exactly. Each office has specific tasks and timelines to meet. It's all about coordination and efficiency.
Let's talk about the actual process. How does it all begin?
Usually it starts with a regional office noticing a violation. This could be from online returns, compliance audits, or even complaints.
So it's not always a planned thing. Sometimes it's a reactive process.
Exactly. They might spot something during a routine check, and that triggers the investigations.
And what happens after they find a violation?
A show cause notice goes out to the company. They get a chance to explain themselves.
So it's not a sudden death penalty. They get a chance to defend themselves?
Right. Due process is important, but if the explanation isn't satisfactory, the cancellation process moves forward.
Are there any exceptions to this process? What if a company's already closed?
Yes, there are exceptions. For closed companies, the focus shifts to transferring the accumulated funds, but the cancellation process might still happen.
So even if the company is gone, the process isn't necessarily over?
Correct. They still need to ensure the employees get what they're owed.
And what about situations where the company is difficult to reach or doesn't cooperate?
The SOP addresses that too. They might use public notices to try and locate the responsible parties. It's about being thorough.
This SOP mentions several forms. What's the purpose of all these forms?
They're crucial for documentation and tracking. Each form has a specific purpose, from the initial show cause notice to the final recommendation for cancellation.
Oh, it's all about keeping a detailed paper trail.
Exactly. It ensures transparency and accountability throughout the process.
The SOP also includes a timeline. How long does this whole process typically take?
It varies, but the SOP sets out target timelines for each step. It's designed to be efficient, but also thorough.
So it's not just about speed, but also about getting it right.
Precisely. They want to balance efficiency with due process.
How do they make sure everything runs smoothly and according to plan?
There's a monitoring mechanism, regular reviews at different levels, from regional offices to the head office. It's about continuous oversight.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. They actively monitor the process?
Absolutely. They want to catch any potential problems early on.
This SOP is a first version. Does that mean it's set in stone?
No, it's designed to be reviewed and updated as needed. Regulations change, and the SOP needs to adapt.
So it's a living document, constantly evolving?
Exactly. It's not static, it's dynamic and responsive to changes in the environment.
And finally, what are some of the key trigger points that initiate this whole cancellation process? Yeah, that was a great discussion. Thanks for breaking down this SOP for us.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion. We're diving into the intricacies of canceling PF exemptions for establishments, a complex process with significant implications for employees and employers alike. Our guest is an expert in this area. Let's start with the basics. What exactly constitutes a PF exemption, and why might it be revoked?
A PF exemption under Section 17 of the EPF Act allows an establishment to manage its own provident fund scheme instead of adhering to the government's mandated scheme. Revocation typically occurs when an establishment fails to meet the conditions initially set for granting the exemption, jeopardizing the social security of its employees.
So it's essentially a privilege, not a right, and that privilege can be taken away?
Precisely. The EPFO acts as a regulator, ensuring the welfare of employees even within exempted schemes. The cancellation itself isn't punitive, it simply withdraws the privilege of self-management.
Interesting. Let's explore the legal framework governing this process. What are the key legal provisions that define the grounds for cancellation?
Primarily, Section 1704 of the EPF Act outlines the conditions for cancellation. This includes non-compliance with conditions imposed during the grant of exemption, as well as violations of specific provisions within the scheme, such as those detailed in Appendix A of Para 27AA.
And what about the role of the appropriate government in this process?
The appropriate government, as defined in the Act, holds the authority to both grant and cancel the exemption. This is crucial because it ensures consistency and prevents conflicts of jurisdiction. For exemptions granted under Section 1702, the Regional Provident Fund Commissioner, RPFC, holds this power.
So the process isn't uniform across all types of exemptions?
Correct. The specific authority responsible for cancellation depends on how the exemption was initially granted.
Let's shift our focus to the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders. What are the key obligations of the establishment itself?
The establishment must promptly report any changes in its legal status, submit annual reports and audited accounts, and ensure its depository participants comply with transfer requests for investments upon cancellation.
And what about the regional office, RO? What's their role in initiating and processing cancellation proposals?
The RO is crucial. They scrutinize online returns, conduct compliance audits, and initiate the cancellation process based on identified violations. They issue show cause notices, assess the severity of violations using a priority matrix, and prepare the draft agenda for higher authorities.
So there's a tiered system of review and escalation?
Absolutely. The RO's proposal moves to the zonal office, ZO, then to the head office, HO, and finally to the appropriate government for the final decision.
Can you walk us through the step-by-step procedure for canceling an exemption, starting from the RO's initiation?
The RO initiates the process upon detecting violations, typically through online returns, performance evaluations, or compliance audits. A show cause notice is issued, followed by an assessment based on the priority matrix. Category A violations trigger immediate action, while categories B and C involve varying levels of opportunity for rectification. The RO then prepares a comprehensive draft agenda, including supporting documents, and forwards it to the ZO.
And what happens to the ZO and HO levels?
The ZO reviews the proposal, adds its recommendations, and forwards it to the HO. The HO scrutinizes the proposal, presents it to the Exempted Establishments Committee, EEC, and the Central Board of Trustees, CBT, and ultimately forwards the CBT's recommendation to the appropriate government.
Are there any exceptional circumstances that might alter this standard procedure?
Yes, several. For instance, if Condition 19 is triggered regarding the transfer of investments, the RPFC directly contacts the depository participants. In cases of closed establishments, the RPFC facilitates the transfer of past accumulations while simultaneously initiating cancellation proceedings. If the employer's whereabouts are unknown, public notices are issued. And in cases of chronic defaulters, compliance actions must be completed before the cancellation proposal is submitted.
The document mentions several forms, CE1 through CE11. What are their purposes?
These forms standardize the communication and documentation throughout the cancellation process. They ensure consistency and clarity in recording the various stages, from initial show cause notices to final recommendations.
What are the key timelines involved, and how is the entire process monitored?
The SOP outlines specific timelines for each stage, from the establishment's response to the final notification. Monitoring occurs at multiple levels: quarterly reviews at the HO, monthly reviews at the ZO and RO, and monthly reports are submitted between offices. An online system is also planned to streamline the process.
The document also addresses several miscellaneous points, such as trigger points for initiating cancellation. Can you highlight some of these?
These include non-filing of online returns after a grace period for technical issues, low scores in the ranking system, consecutive losses, deviations from investment patterns, interest rate discrepancies, and compliance issues. A priority matrix categorizes these violations to guide the appropriate response.
Finally, what about the change history and review process for this SOP?
This is the first version of the SOP. It will be reviewed periodically, typically every 2 years, to adapt to changing regulations and business needs.
So in essence, this SOP provides a comprehensive framework for a complex process, balancing the need to protect employee interests with the due process afforded to establishments. It's a detailed and well-structured approach.
Indeed, the emphasis on clear timelines, standardized forms, and multi-level monitoring ensures transparency and efficiency while safeguarding the rights of all stakeholders.
That was a great discussion. Thank you for your insights.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion on the Employees Provident Fund Organization's standard operating procedure for canceling PF exemptions. It's a pretty complex topic, but crucial for understanding employee rights.
Indeed. The intricacies of Section 17 OFIS of the EPF Act are often overlooked, yet they significantly impact employers and employees alike.
Exactly. This SOP outlines a process that seems straightforward, on the surface, but it has many hidden layers, I see.
The definitions alone are a rabbit hole. Appropriate government, compliance audit, depository participants, each term carries significant weight.
Right, and the role and responsibilities are spread across multiple offices, from the regional office to head office. Coordination is key.
Absolutely. A breakdown in communication could easily delay or derail the entire cancellation process.
Let's start with the introduction. It highlights the rationale behind canceling exemptions, essentially, ensuring employees receive adequate Social Security benefits.
The introduction also clarifies that cancellation isn't punitive. It's a revocation of a privilege, not a penalty. That's a key distinction, legally speaking.
The purpose of the SOP is to standardize the cancellation process, providing clarity and consistency across all EPFO offices.
It aims to streamline the procedure, making it more efficient and transparent for all stakeholders. This includes establishing timelines and a monitoring mechanism.
The scope is broad, encompassing various scenarios, including closed or liquidated establishments. This ensures a comprehensive approach.
The definitions section is critical. Understanding the specific meanings of terms like act, appropriate government, and CBT is essential for interpreting the SOP correctly.
Each definition is carefully crafted to avoid ambiguity and ensure consistent application of the rules.
The detailed definitions prevent misinterpretations and ensure everyone's on the same page. This is crucial for a fair and efficient process.
Section 17 of the Act is the cornerstone of the entire SOP. It outlines the conditions under which an exemption can be canceled.
It's important to note that different subsections of Section 17, as the conditions for cancellation, vary depending on how the exemption was initially granted.
Right. Para 27AA Appendix A of the scheme adds another layer of complexity, outlining specific conditions for exemption.
These conditions, effective from October 30, 2003, significantly impact the grounds for cancellation. Understanding these is paramount.
The Roles and Responsibilities section clearly delineates the duties of each stakeholder, from the establishment itself to the head office.
The establishment has responsibilities regarding communication of changes and timely submission of reports. Failure to comply can trigger the cancellation process.
The regional office plays a crucial role in scrutiny, compliance audits, and preparing the draft agenda for cancellation.
The zonal office forwards the draft agenda to the head office and coordinates with the appropriate government. The head office then presents the case to the CBT.
The specific procedure section details the step-by-step process, starting with the initiation of the cancellation process at the regional office level.
Triggers for initiating the process include scrutiny of online returns, compliance audits, and complaints. A show cause notice is issued to the establishment.
The response to the show cause notice is crucial. The RPFC then takes action based on a priority matrix, categorizing violations into A, B, and C.
Category A violations lead to immediate action, while B and C violations allow for rectification, but repeated violations can still lead to cancellation.
The SOP also addresses exceptional circumstances, such as closed establishments or situations where the employer's whereabouts are unknown.
These provisions ensure that the process remains fair and effective, even in complex or unusual situations. The focus remains on protecting employee interests.
The section on exceptional circumstances highlights the importance of flexibility within the framework of the SOP.
It acknowledges that not all cases will fit neatly into the standard procedure and provides guidance for handling such situations.
The SOP includes a list of forms and templates to be used throughout the cancellation process. This ensures consistency and standardization.
These forms provide a structured approach to documenting each step, making the process more transparent and auditable.
The use of standardized forms minimizes ambiguity and ensures that all necessary information is collected.
This contributes to a more efficient and effective cancellation process, reducing delays and potential errors.
The timeline matrix provides a clear overview of the expected time frame for each step in the process.
This helps ensure accountability and promotes timely completion of the cancellation process. It also clarifies who is responsible for each task.
The matrix helps to manage expectations and prevent delays caused by unclear responsibilities.
It's a crucial tool for monitoring progress and identifying potential bottlenecks in the process.
The monitoring mechanism ensures accountability at all levels, from the regional office to the head office.
Regular reviews and reports help to identify and address any issues or delays in the process. This ensures efficiency and effectiveness.
The online system, once developed, will further enhance the monitoring and tracking of cancellation cases.
This will provide a centralized platform for managing the entire process, improving transparency and accountability.
The SOP is a living document, subject to modifications and amendments as needed.
This ensures that the procedure remains relevant and adaptable to changing circumstances and legal requirements.
The inclusion of internal and external references provides context and supports the legal basis of the SOP.
These references help to clarify the legal framework and ensure that the SOP aligns with relevant laws and regulations.
The miscellaneous section addresses specific trigger points for initiating the cancellation procedure, such as non-filing of returns or low scores in the ranking system.
This section provides further clarification on the circumstances that may lead to the initiation of the cancellation process.
The change history section documents any modifications or amendments made to the SOP over time.
This ensures transparency and allows for tracking the evolution of the procedure. It also provides a record of any significant changes.
This discussion has provided a comprehensive overview of the EPFO's SOP for canceling PF exemptions. It's a complex but vital process for protecting employee rights.
Understanding the legal framework, the roles and responsibilities, and the specific procedures is crucial for all stakeholders. Absolutely.
Thank you for this insightful discussion.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion. We'll be delving into a standard operating procedure, SOP, for canceling employees' Provident Fund, EPF, exemptions granted to establishments. This SOP outlines the process for revoking these exemptions when certain conditions are violated. What are the primary reasons for canceling an EPF exemption?
Primarily, an EPF exemption is canceled when an establishment fails to comply with the conditions initially set for granting the exemption. These conditions often relate to maintaining a financial stability that ensures employee benefits are at least as good as those provided under the standard EPF Act. The goal is to protect the Social Security entitlements of employees.
So it's not a punitive measure, but rather a safeguard for employee welfare?
Precisely. While the cancellation itself isn't a penalty, it ensures that the establishment adheres to the minimum standards of employee benefits outlined in the EPF Act. The courts have upheld this view, emphasizing that the exemption is a privilege, not a right.
The SOP mentions several key legal provisions. Can you highlight the most important ones?
Section 17(4) of the EPF Act is central, detailing the conditions under which an exemption can be canceled. Section 17(5) addresses the transfer of past accumulations, PA, after cancellation. Para 27AA Appendix A of the EPF scheme outlines specific conditions of exemption, including financial stability and investment patterns.
The SOP also outlines roles and responsibilities. Who are the key players in this process?
The establishment itself has responsibilities, such as reporting changes in legal status and providing annual reports. The Regional Office, OA, conducts compliance audits and initiates cancellation proposals. The Zonal Office, VO, reviews and forwards proposals, and the Head Office, HO, presents them to the Central Board of Trustees, CBT, for final decision.
What's the specific procedure for initiating a cancellation?
The process begins at the RO, triggered by various factors like online return scrutiny, compliance audits, or complaints. A show cause notice is issued, and based on the response and a priority matrix, the RO decides whether to proceed with cancellation. The proposal then moves through the ZO and HO before reaching the CBT.
The SOP mentions a priority matrix. What does that entail?
The priority matrix categorizes violations into 3 levels, A, B, and C, based on severity. Category A violations lead to immediate cancellation, while B and C violations allow for rectification before cancellation is considered. This system ensures a fair and proportionate response to different levels of non-compliance.
What happens in exceptional circumstances, such as a closed establishment?
Even for closed establishments, the process aims to secure employee entitlements. The RO facilitates the transfer of past accumulations, but cancellation proceedings can still be initiated based on available records. Special procedures are outlined for situations where the employer's whereabouts are unknown.
The SOP includes various forms and templates. What is their purpose?
These forms standardize the communication and documentation throughout the cancellation process. They ensure consistency and efficiency in information gathering and decision-making.
What's the timeline of the entire process?
The SOP provides timelines for each stage, from the establishment's response to the show, cause notice, to the final decision by the CBT. These timelines aim to ensure a timely resolution while protecting employee interests.
How is the process monitored?
Monitoring occurs at multiple levels, OO, ZO, and HO, with regular reviews and reports to track progress and identify potential bottlenecks. An online system is also planned to further streamline the process.
Are there any provisions for modifications or amendments to the SOP?
Yes, the SOP is designed to be reviewed periodically to adapt changing needs and regulations. This ensures its continued relevance and effectiveness.
What are some of the trigger points for initiating the cancellation procedure?
Trigger points include non-filing of online returns, low scores in the performance evaluation system, consecutive years of losses, deviations from prescribed investment patterns, and other compliance issues. The SOP clarifies the actions to be taken in each scenario.
Finally, what happens to the past accumulations after the exemption is canceled?
The SOP emphasizes the importance of transferring past accumulations to the EPFO to protect employee benefits. Specific procedures are outlined to ensure this transfer happens smoothly and efficiently. This discussion has been very informative. Thank you. This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. Welcome to today's discussion on the Employees Provident Fund Organization's standard operating procedure for canceling PF exemptions. It's a pretty complex topic, but crucial for understanding employee rights.
Indeed. The intricacies of Section 17 Office of the EPF Act are often overlooked, yet they significantly impact employers and employees alike.
Exactly. This SOP outlines a process that seems straightforward, on the surface, but it has many hidden layers. I see.
The definitions alone are a rabbit hole. Appropriate government, compliance audit, depository participants, each term carries significant weight.
Right, and the role and responsibilities are spread across multiple offices, from the regional office to head office. Coordination is key.
Absolutely. A breakdown in communication could easily delay or derail the entire cancellation process.
Let's start with the introduction. It highlights the rationale behind canceling exemptions, essentially, ensuring employees receive adequate Social Security benefits.
The introduction also clarifies that cancellation isn't punitive. It's a revocation of a privilege, not a penalty. That's a key distinction, legally speaking.
The purpose of the SOP is to standardize the cancellation process, providing clarity and consistency across all EPFO offices.
It aims to streamline the procedure, making it more efficient and transparent for all stakeholders. This includes establishing timelines and a monitoring mechanism.
The scope is broad, encompassing various scenarios, including closed or liquidated establishments. This ensures a comprehensive approach.
The definitions section is critical. Understanding the specific meanings of terms like ACT, appropriate government, and CBT is essential for interpreting the SOP correctly.
Each definition is carefully crafted to avoid ambiguity and ensure consistent application of the rules.
The detailed definitions prevent misinterpretations and ensure everyone's on the same page. This is crucial for a fair and efficient process.
Section 17 of the Act is the cornerstone of the entire SOP. It outlines the conditions under which an exemption can be canceled.
It's important to note the different subsections of Section 17, as the conditions for cancellation vary depending on how the exemption was initially granted.
Right. Para 27AA Appendix A of the scheme adds another layer of complexity, outlining specific conditions for exemption.
These conditions, effective from October 30, 2003, significantly impact the grounds for cancellation. Understanding these is paramount.
The roles and responsibilities section clearly delineates the duties of each stakeholder, from the establishment itself to the head office.
The establishment has responsibilities regarding communication of changes and timely submission of reports. Failure to comply can trigger the cancellation process.
The regional office plays a crucial role in scrutiny, compliance audits, and preparing the draft agenda for cancellation.
The zonal office forwards the draft agenda to the head office and coordinates with the appropriate government. The head office then presents the case to the CBT.
The specific procedure section details the step-by-step process, starting with the initiation of the cancellation process at the regional office level.
Triggers for initiating the process include scrutiny of online returns, compliance audits, and complaints. A show cause notice is issued to the establishment.
The response to the show cause notice is crucial. The RPFC then takes action based on a priority matrix, categorizing violations into A, B, and C.
Category A violations lead to immediate action, while B and C violations allow for rectification, but repeated violations can still lead to cancellation.
The SOP also addresses exceptional circumstances, such as closed establishments or situations where the employer's whereabouts are unknown.
These provisions ensure that the process remains fair and effective, even in complex or unusual situations. The focus remains on protecting employee interests.
The section on exceptional circumstances highlights the importance of flexibility within the framework of the SOP.
It acknowledges that not all cases will fit neatly into the standard procedure and provides guidance for handling such situations.
The SOP includes a list of forms and templates to be used throughout the cancellation process. This ensures consistency and standardization.
These forms provide a structured approach to documenting each step, making the process more transparent and auditable.
The use of standardized forms minimizes ambiguity and ensures that all necessary information is collected.
This contributes to a more efficient and effective cancellation process, reducing delays and potential errors.
The timeline matrix provides a clear overview of the expected time frame for each step in the process.
This helps ensure accountability and promotes timely completion of the cancellation process. It also clarifies who is responsible for each task.
The matrix helps to manage expectations and prevent delays caused by unclear responsibilities.
It's a crucial tool for monitoring progress and identifying potential bottlenecks in the process.
The monitoring mechanism ensures accountability at all levels, from the regional office to the head office.
Regular reviews and reports help to identify and address any issues or delays in the process. This ensures efficiency and effectiveness.
The online system, once developed, will further enhance the monitoring and tracking of cancellation cases.
This will provide a centralized platform for managing the entire process, improving transparency and accountability.
The SOP is a living document, subject to modifications and amendments as needed.
This ensures that the procedure remains relevant and adaptable to changing circumstances and legal requirements.
The inclusion of internal and external references provides context and supports the legal basis of the SOP.
These references help to clarify the legal framework and ensure that the SOP aligns with relevant laws and regulations.
The miscellaneous section addresses specific trigger points for initiating the cancellation procedure, such as non-filing of returns or low scores in the ranking system.
This section provides further clarification on the circumstances that may lead to the initiation of the cancellation process.
The change history section documents any modifications or amendments made to the SOP over time.
This ensures transparency and allows for tracking the evolution of the procedure. It also provides a record of any significant changes.
This discussion has provided a comprehensive overview of the EPFO's SOP for canceling PF exemptions. It's a complex but vital process for protecting employee rights.
Understanding the legal framework, the roles and responsibilities, and the specific procedures is crucial for all stakeholders. Absolutely.
Thank you for this insightful discussion.
All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at the Employee Provident Fund scheme in India. But we're not just talking about like the basics.
Definitely not. This is going to be a little more in depth than that.
Yeah, we're going deep into how those special exemptions, the ones given to some companies, how they can be taken away.
Right. And well, I think it's important to start off by saying just how important the EPF is in India.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just some obscure financial thing, right?
Not at all. We're talking about retirement savings from millions of people. It's basically a mandatory savings plan for most employees.
Right, with both, the workers and the employers contributing to it.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a built-in safety net for when they retire.
Okay, so a safety net, I like that. But then there's this twist, right? Because some companies get to play by a slightly different set of rules.
Right. They can apply for what's called an exemption, which basically means they manage their employees' EPF money themselves.
So instead of sending it to the central government pool, they get to manage it within the company.
Exactly. But it's not like a free-for-all.
Oh, I bet. There are definitely strings attached.
Big time. It's a privilege, definitely not a right. That's granted based on, a few things, like their financial stability has to be rock solid, and they also have to match or even, do better than the benefits offered by the government.
So it's like they have to prove they can handle this responsibility and do right by their employees. But we're not focusing on all that today, right? What we're really digging into is what happens when those responsibilities aren't met.
Right, and that's where this document comes in, the Standard Operating Procedure, or SOP, that lays out exactly how those exemptions can be canceled. It's pretty detailed.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who wants to understand the ins and outs of this system, this SOP is like the ultimate guide.
And it's fascinating how thorough they are. Right from the get-go, the SOP makes it crystal clear that protecting the workers' interests is the top priority.
So, no messing around. They're serious about this. And speaking of being serious, one of the first things that jumped out at me is that right under Section 17 of the EPF Act, the SOP emphasizes that getting an exemption is a privilege, not a right. And they even use actual court cases to drive that point home.
Yeah, the Tata Iron and Steel Co. Ltd v. Bir Singh case, that one's a really important one. Basically, the court said that even if a company manages its own EPF funds, it's still considered part of the larger EPF scheme. The government doesn't just wash its hands of it.
So even with an exemption, those companies are still under the watchful eye of the government. They can't just, do whatever they want with those funds.
Exactly. And there's another case mentioned, the N.K. Jain and others, DCK Shaw, that emphasizes those safeguards in place to protect employee interests, making sure the company is actually investing the money properly.
Right, because the whole point of this is to ensure those funds are there for the employees when they retire. Right. It's not just some free money for the companies to play around with.
Exactly. And that's where Section 17(4) of the EPF Act comes in.
Okay, so that's the big one when it comes to cancellation power, right? It basically spells out exactly why and how that can happen. It even defines the appropriate government, the specific authority that actually has the power to revoke an exemption.
And it gets really specific too, with different subsections within 17.4 addressing like different types of exemptions and, what exactly constitutes grounds for cancellation. It's not like a one-size-fits-all situation.
So they're really taking a tailored approach, looking at each case individually before, pulling the plug on that exemption. Now, before we go any further, I think it might be helpful to define a few key terms that this SOP uses, just so everyone's on the same page. I mean, some of this jargon can be a bit, confusing.
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with appropriate government. It sounds very official, but basically it just refers to, whoever has the power to grant and cancel these exemptions.
Okay, makes sense. And then there's the cancellation date. That one's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, just the day the exemption officially ends.
Okay, but what about compliance audit? That one sounds a little, intimidating.
Not really. It's basically just, it's like a financial health inspection. The EPFO's regional office will come in and make sure the company is managing those funds properly, providing the right benefits, keeping everything transparent.
Right. It's all about accountability, making sure they're playing by the rules. Okay. And last but not least, there's this term priority matrix. It sounds very, very official.
It is. It's like imagine a triage system for violations. So it helps the EPFO, categorize the seriousness of any issues they find during those compliance audits. So like a minor paperwork mistake might not be treated with the same urgency as, let's say, a company failing to deposit those employee contributions.
Okay, that makes sense. It's all about, prioritizing those really serious issues. Now, this whole process, the exemption and the cancellation, it involves a bunch of different players, right? Each with their own roles and responsibilities.
Exactly. It's like it's a well choreographed dance, you could say. You have the establishment, the company that's got that exemption, then the regional office, the RO that acts as the watchdog. Then you've got the zonal office, or ZO, coordinating things. And finally, the big boss, the head office, makes those final calls.
Okay, so a whole team effort. So
Yeah.
let's start with those companies, those establishments, the ones lucky enough to get that exemption. What are their main obligations? What do they have to do to keep things running smoothly?
Well, first and foremost, transparency is key. They have to keep the Regional Provident Fund Commissioner, the RPFC, informed about any major changes to their structure. Things like mergers, acquisitions, basically anything that could affect, their financial stability and their ability to keep meeting those exemption conditions.
So no sneaky business.
Yeah.
Right. They have to be upfront about anything that might impact those employee funds. What else is top of the list for them?
Our timely paperwork is crucial. They have to submit annual reports, audited accounts, basically all the financial details so that the EPFO has that clear picture of their financial health. And of course, it helps ensure that they're actually meeting those requirements.
The joys of bureaucracy. But I get it. It's all about accountability in the end. Anything else about their responsibilities that stands out to you?
Well, there's one detail that's, I think, really interesting. They have to set up standing instructions with their depository participants.
Depository participants. Okay, now we're getting into the financial weeds.
It's not that complicated. Think of them as the guardians of those EPF funds. They're the ones who hold the investments, on behalf of the employees. So these standing instructions basically ensure that if, for whatever reason the exemption gets canceled, those investments are transferred directly back to the RPFC.
So it's like a safety net within a safety net. Even if the company, messes up, those employees' money is still protected.
Exactly. And speaking of safety nets, let's talk about those regional offices, the ROs. Those are the ones on the ground, making sure these companies are playing by the rules.
So they're like the EPFOs, like eyes and ears, constantly on the lookout for any funny business.
That's a great way to put it. They're constantly scrutinizing those online returns filed by the companies, and they conduct those compliance audits we talked about, making sure everything's above board.
Right, so they're not just sitting back waiting for something to go wrong. They're actively looking for potential problems. So what happens if, during one of those audits, they find something? Do they just immediately shut the whole thing down?
Well, not necessarily. Remember that priority matrix we talked about? That comes into play here. So depending on how serious the violation is, they might recommend canceling the exemption, or they might give the company, a chance to fix the issue.
Okay, so it's a more balanced approach, not just, swinging the hammer at the first sign of trouble.
Yeah.
It's more about, guiding them back towards compliance.
Right. And remember, their main goal is to protect those workers and their savings. So sometimes the best way to do that is to work with the company to address those issues and get them back on track. But, sometimes that's just not possible.
So in those cases, the hammer does come down.
Well, not quite. They play a crucial role in the process, but the final decision rests with the appropriate government.
Right, so they're kind of like the investigator, gathering the evidence, making recommendations, but then they need someone higher up to give the final approval, right?
Exactly. And that's where the zonal office and the head office come in. They're the higher-ups in this whole system. Think of the zonal office, the ZO, as like the middleman.
Okay, so they review the recommendations from the RO and then pass them along to the head office.
Exactly. Making sure everything's in order and the process is running smoothly. And then the head office, they're the ones with, the final say.
So they review everything, all the evidence, all the recommendations, and if they agree, then, well, that's when the exemption officially gets canceled.
Right, but even then, they still have to send their recommendation to the appropriate government.
So even the head office doesn't have the ultimate power.
Well, they have a lot of authority, but the final decision still rests with the government.
I see. So it's a very multi-layered system with checks and balances at each level. They're not just, randomly canceling exemptions left and right. They really want to make sure this process is fair and transparent.
Exactly. And remember, these exemptions are a big deal for companies, so it's crucial that the process is thorough, well-documented, and most importantly, based on solid evidence.
Well, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to this SOP, so much more to explore.
Oh, absolutely. We've just laid the groundwork. Now we need to get into the nitty-gritty details of how that cancellation process actually unfolds, step by step. And that's where things get really interesting. So last time we were talking about those higher-ups, the zonal office and the head office, getting involved in the whole cancellation process. It's like this, it's like this chain of command, making sure every decision is, carefully considered.
Right, so it's not just someone, deciding on a whim to cancel an exemption. There's a process, a whole system in place. But I'm still a bit fuzzy on how that cancellation process actually, plays out. How it all starts. It all begins with those regional offices, the ROs, right?
Exactly. Remember, those ROs are constantly monitoring those exempted companies, right? They scrutinize all those online submissions and conduct those, compliance audits we talked about. So let's say during one of those audits, they find something that raises a red flag. What happens next?
Well, I'm guessing they don't just storm into the company's office and shut the whole thing down, right?
Yeah. Nope, not quite. It's a much more structured process. The first thing they do is issue what's called a show cause notice.
Okay, and what is that exactly?
Think of it as a formal, heads up. It's basically giving the company a chance to explain themselves.
So it's like saying, hey, we've noticed this, and we need you to tell us what's going on. It's not an immediate, condemnation. It's more like an opportunity for them to clarify things.
Right. And in that show cause notice, they outline, the specific violation they've identified, and they give the company a deadline to respond.
Okay, so the company gets a chance to plead their case, basically. And then what do? Do they just send a letter back?
Well, they submit a formal reply, providing any documentation or explanations, to address those concerns.
Okay, so the company has had their say. What happens next? Does the RO just take their word for it?
Not quite. The RO then carefully reviews that response, and they cross-check it, with their own findings from the audit. And remember that priority matrix we talked about.
Right, the one that helps them decide, how serious the issue is.
Exactly. They use that to really assess the severity of the violation.
Okay, so let's say the RO isn't satisfied with the explanation, or the violation is just, too serious to ignore. What happens then?
Well, that's when things start to escalate. The RO then begins preparing this detailed proposal, basically recommending that the exemption be canceled.
So it's not just a casual, hey, we think you should cancel this. It's a formal, documented proposal.
Oh yeah, it's a very thorough document, tacked with evidence to support their recommendation.
I bet. They need to present a pretty strong case if they want to justify, taking away a company's exemption. What kind of information goes into this proposal?
Lots of stuff. They include, the original exemption notification, copies of that show cause notice, and the company's responses. They'll add reports from the compliance audit, and they even get an assessment from a third-party auditor.
Wow, a third-party auditor.
Yep. Someone who takes a really close look at the company's finances, how they've been managing those EPF funds.
So they're really doing their due diligence, making sure their recommendation is like rock solid. Okay, so they've got this mountain of documentation, this proposal, all ready to go. Where does it go next?
It gets sent up the chain of command, to the zonal office, the ZO, for their review. Remember, they're like the middleman, making sure the process runs smoothly.
Right, and that only the most serious, well-substantiated proposals reach the head office. So the ZO takes a look at everything, reviews all the evidence, and if they agree with the RO's recommendation, what then?
They forward the proposal, along with their own recommendations, up to the head office. And that's where things get really, really serious.
The head office, that's the big leagues. I'm guessing they don't just, automatically approve every proposal that lands on their desk.
Definitely not. It goes through another round of intense scrutiny at the head office. They have a special committee there called the Exempted Establishments Committee, or EEC, that examines the whole case.
So it's like a panel of experts carefully considering everything, making a judgment based on the facts. It's kind of like a mini trial for the company's exemption.
You could say that. And if they agree with the recommendation for cancellation, it moves up to the Central Board of Trustees, the CBT, for final approval.
Okay, so the CBT is the ultimate decision maker within the EPFO, right?
Yeah, they have the final say.
Right.
And if they give their stamp of approval, the head office then drafts a formal recommendation, outlining their reasons for supporting the cancellation, and sends it to the appropriate government for the final call.
And once the government issues that official notification, that's it. Game over for the company's exemption. Back to the standard EPF rules for them. It's amazing how much thought and effort goes into this whole process.
It really shows you how seriously they take this responsibility, protecting those workers' retirement savings. They've created this whole detailed system to make sure it's fair, transparent, and accountable every step of the way.
Yeah, they're not messing around. Now, I know we've been focusing on the cancellation process, but I'm curious, what happens after a company's exemption is revoked? Do they just seamlessly transition back into the standard EPF system?
It's not quite that simple. Remember, all this time, they've been managing those funds independently. Now they have to reconcile everything, transfer all those funds back to that central EPF pool.
Oh, right. It's not just about following the standard rules from that point on. Yeah. They actually have to hand over all that money, make sure everything is accounted for. It sounds like it could be a real logistical nightmare.
It can be, but the SOP actually outlines, a clear procedure for this too. They want to ensure a smooth transition and, most importantly, protect those workers.
Okay, so how does this transfer actually work? Does the company just write a giant check to the EPFO and call it a day?
Not quite. They have to provide a detailed statement of all the funds they've been managing. All the contributions, any interest earned, any withdrawals that were made during that exemption period. Think of it like their financial report card, basically.
I bet the EPFO goes through that statement with a fine-tooth comb.
Oh, absolutely. They double-check everything, making sure it all adds up. Once they're satisfied, that everything's accurate, then the funds are officially transferred, and those employees become part of the standard EPF scheme again.
So it's a carefully orchestrated handover.
Yeah.
With the EPFO making sure, no money gets lost in the shuffle.
Exactly.
Now, I'm curious, what about the company? Are there any, long-term consequences for them for losing their exemption?
It can be a pretty big deal. Besides the hassle of, switching back to the standard system, there can be reputational damage.
Right, it's not a good look.
Right. Losing that exemption, it can be seen as a sign that the company isn't as financially stable as they claimed, or that they weren't able to meet, those requirements.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that would raise some eyebrows, with investors, potential employees, even customers. It kind of makes you wonder, well, if they couldn't handle this, what else are they struggling with?
Exactly. So while the immediate impact might be mostly administrative, there can be, those longer-term consequences that companies need to consider.
Now, I remember you mentioning that the SOP outlines a whole system for monitoring these companies, the ones with exemptions. They don't just grant the exemption and then, Forget about them.
Oh, definitely not. The EPFO's main goal is to protect those workers' retirement savings, right? And to do that, they need to keep a close eye on those companies, the ones that have those exemptions.
Okay, so it's like a continuous process, not just a one-time check.
Exactly. They've set up this like multi-tiered monitoring system with checks happening at the regional level, the zonal level, and the head office level.
Wow, so everyone's involved. It's like this constant feedback loop, ensuring accountability at every stage. So let's break it down a bit. What kind of monitoring is happening at those regional offices, the ROs, where, it all starts?
Well, so ROs are, they're the ones on the front lines. They submit regular reports to the zonal offices, providing updates on all the exemption cases they're handling, information about, any new exemptions granted, any compliance audits that are going on, and of course, any potential violations they've found or cancellation proposals they're working on.
So it's like a progress report, keeping those higher-ups in the loop.
Right. That constant flow of information means that the zonal office has, that overview of the situation and can step in if they need to.
Okay, so what about those zonal offices? What's their role in all of this?
They're like the link between the ROs and the head office. They take all those reports from the ROs and put together these comprehensive summaries that they send up to the head office.
Okay, so they're compiling all the information, making sure everything is organized and easy to understand. But they're not just passing along information, are they?
No, they also do periodic reviews of the ROs, making sure they're following the guidelines, doing their jobs properly.
Right, so it's like a hierarchy of oversight, with each level checking on the one below it. And then at the very top, you have the head office keeping an eye on the entire system. What are they doing to make sure everything is running smoothly?
They're the big picture people, analyzing trends and identifying any areas where things could be improved. They get those regular reports from the zonal offices, but they also do their own independent reviews, taking a deep dive into how the whole exemption system is performing.
So they're not just passively receiving information, they're actively looking for ways to make the system better, more efficient.
Exactly. And they might also choose to audit specific cases themselves, especially if they involve, high-profile companies or particularly serious violations.
So they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, to really dig into the details if they need to. It's all about maintaining that high level of oversight and accountability. This whole monitoring system it's really impressive. It's like a well-oiled machine.
It is. It shows you how important this whole thing is to them. But I think it also raises a good question. With all these safeguards, all this monitoring, why is it so important to have a clear process for canceling those exemptions in the first place? Why even bother?
That's a good point. I mean, if they're monitoring everything so closely, wouldn't they catch any problems before they get out of hand?
Well, remember, those exemptions are granted based on certain criteria, like the company's financial stability, their ability to meet those benefit requirements. But things change. Companies can run into financial difficulties, they can get acquired, merge with other entities, and sometimes they just might not be able to uphold their end of the bargain anymore.
Right. Circumstances change, and without a clear way to revoke those exemptions, those workers' savings could be at risk.
Exactly. So this cancellation process, it's like that safety net, ensuring that if a company isn't meeting those requirements anymore, or if their financial stability is in question, the EPFO can step in, revoke that exemption, and protect those savings. It's all about protecting those workers and their financial security, no matter what happens.
So the cancellation process is like that final safeguard, that last line of defense.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the EPF isn't just some bureaucratic system. It's a lifeline for so many people. And the government is taking that responsibility very seriously.
Absolutely. And they're not just, sitting back and being complacent. They're actively looking for ways to improve the system, make it even more efficient and effective. The SOP even mentions that they're considering developing an online system to handle everything digitally.
Wow, no, that would be a game changer. Imagine being able to, track your EPF contributions online, project your retirement savings, manage withdrawals all in one place.
Exactly. It would make the whole system so much more user-friendly and accessible for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get too carried away, I know there are a few more details from the SOP that we need to unpack. Specifically, those exceptional circumstances you mentioned earlier.
Oh, right. Those are the situations where that standard cancellation process might not apply. There are a few specific scenarios where things work a little differently. Like, remember condition known 19, that special clause we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the one about like immediate transfer of funds if a company closes down or goes into liquidation, right?
Exactly. It's like a safety valve, making sure those worker savings are protected, even in those, really chaotic situations. And in those cases, things move much faster. The RPFC can actually go directly to those depository participants, the ones holding the funds, and request the transfer of those investments straight to the Central Board of Trustees.
So they don't have to go through that whole lengthy cancellation process. It's like a shortcut, basically.
It is, and it shows you just how important it is for them to protect those savings. They've really thought of everything. But condition no. 19 isn't the only exception. They also have to deal with cases involving closed establishments.
Right, those are the tricky ones, trying to track down all that information, make sure those employees still get what they're owed, even years after the company's shut down.
It can be a real challenge. Imagine trying to find records for a company that closed decades ago, maybe with no forwarding address, no contact information. It's tough.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
So how do they even approach those cases? Do they just give up and say, well, that money's gone?
No way. They're incredibly persistent. They might start by trying to contact any former employees they can find, scour public records for clues, or even reach out to industry associations, to see if anyone has any leads.
So it's a real detective mission, piecing together all those little bits of information to, make sure those workers aren't forgotten.
Exactly. And sometimes they have to get a little creative. Remember that mention of advertising in local newspapers?
Right. Putting out that public call, hoping someone out there knows something. It's like a long shot, but sometimes it's the only way to uncover those records and make sure those workers get their benefits, even years later.
It really speaks to their commitment to Social Security, making sure everyone is taken care of.
It's amazing how much effort they put into it. It makes you realize this isn't just about numbers and regulations. It's about real people, their lives.
I completely agree. It's a reminder that these schemes, these programs, they're about real people and their futures.
And we're back. Welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into, the EPF scheme in India, specifically those exemption cancellations. And wow, what a journey it's been. It's amazing how much detail and thought has gone into this whole system.
It really is. We've seen just how dedicated they are to making sure everything's fair, transparent, accountable. But before we wrap things up, I think it's worth highlighting a few key points, those things that really show the depth of this system.
Definitely. I mean, there were a few things that really stood out to me, especially those exceptional circumstances where, the usual process kind of takes a detour. Those were fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Those exceptions really demonstrate how committed they are to protecting those funds, even in those tricky situations. Remember condition 919? That one was almost like a secret weapon, protecting those savings when a company closes down or goes through liquidation.
It's like a fast track system, you
Yeah.
know, cutting through the red tape to get those funds back where they belong, back with the EPFO. But honestly, what really impressed me was how they handle those cases with closed establishments. Talk about a challenge.
It's like a financial forensics investigation. I mean, trying to track down records for a company that shut down, maybe even decades ago, that's no easy task, but they don't give up. They've got all these strategies to uncover those lost records, to make sure those workers, those employees, aren't forgotten.
It's incredible. They'll contact former employees, dig through public records. I mean, they even put ads in local newspapers, hoping for a lead. It really shows you how dedicated they are to making sure every single worker gets what they're owed, even years after their employer is gone.
It's powerful, It's a reminder that this isn't just a system, it's about people, real people who rely on these savings. The EPFO, they're not just going through the motions, they're actively fighting to protect those livelihoods.
Yeah, it makes you realize that behind all those, rules and regulations, there's a real human element to this whole thing. Now, as we look ahead, it's clear that technology is going to play a big role in shaping the future of the EPF.
Oh, absolutely. The SOP, it even hints at that, mentioning plans for an on-leave system to streamline everything. Imagine being able to track your contributions, project your savings, even manage withdrawals, all online.
That would be a game changer. It would make the whole system so much easier to use, more accessible for everyone.
Exactly. And for the EPFO itself, think about what they could do with AI, with artificial intelligence, analyzing data, detecting those potential violations even faster, even predicting future trends in the workforce.
Wow, it's like building a smarter system, one that can adapt to the changing needs of the Indian workforce.
Right. It's a really exciting time for Social Security in India. They're not just, standing still. They're innovating, looking for ways to improve, to make the system even stronger.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm in awe of how massive and intricate this whole system is. It really is a testament to India's commitment to Social Security for its citizens.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible journey exploring this, the seemingly obscure but incredibly vital part of India's social and economic fabric. And I really hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for the dedication, the thoughtfulness, the human impact of this whole system.
We've covered it all, haven't we? From the tiniest details of the SOP to those big questions about the future of Social Security in India, the rules, the processes, the challenges, and the incredible potential.
And along the way, I think we've all learned something really important, something valuable. Social Security, it's not just about government programs or, financial regulations. It's about people. It's about lives, dreams, hopes for a secure future.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into, the world of EPF exemption cancellations in India. Thank you all so much for joining us on this journey.
We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
The world of Social Security is vast, it's always changing, and it affects us all. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions.
Until next time.
Okay, so today we're going deep into EPF exemptions in India.
Oh, interesting.
The Employee Provident Fund. It's like retirement planning 101 for so many people.
Right.
But did you know some companies can actually manage those funds themselves?
Yeah, it's like a custom retirement plan almost.
Exactly. Potentially higher returns, more control.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
To really get this, we've got some
pretty dense material.
Yeah, dense but important documents. Exemption Division Manual, Exempted Return Manual, and the SOP for Management and Regulation of EPF exemption.
These are like the rule books.
The blueprints for this whole system.
Yeah.
If you're thinking, whoa, this sounds intense, you're right.
It can be.
But it's crucial to understand, especially if you're working for...
Or thinking about joining a company with this kind of setup.
Exactly. So let's go back in time a bit.
A little history lesson.
Yeah, these exemptions didn't just appear overnight, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The EPF scheme itself has been around for ages.
Right. But this idea of exemptions, it goes back to 1953.
Wow, that's way back.
Pretty groundbreaking for its time, and it's evolved over the years, especially with, the internet and everything.
Like going digital.
Right. Electronic returns in 2003, a simpler process for surrendering exemptions in 2016.
It keeps adapting.
It has to.
So, before we go too deep, let's define things.
The basics.
What makes an establishment exempt in the world of EPF?
So basically, under Section 17 of the EPF Act,
Yeah.
some establishments can manage their employees' provident funds themselves through their own trusts.
Okay, so more autonomy.
Right. But here's the catch. They have to provide benefits that are equal to or better than the standard EPF scheme.
So, no cutting corners.
Absolutely not.
It's like, we trust you to handle this, but you better not shortchange anyone. You might even need to do better.
Exactly.
So for our listeners, what's the good part of being in an exempted establishment?
Well, first of all, there's the potential for higher returns on your investments.
Oh, that's appealing.
Right. If the trust manages things well, you could have a bigger nest egg when you retire compared to the regular scheme.
And it's not just the money, right?
No, it's not. Often there are faster claim settlements.
So you're not waiting forever to get your money when you need it.
Exactly.
I can see how having your retirement fund managed by a trust you're part of might feel more, personal.
A lot of people feel that way, yeah.
Yeah.
And many exempted establishments also offer better access to your account information.
Like online portals and stuff.
Yeah, online portals, passbook facilities, sometimes more direct engagement with the board of trustees.
So more transparency, more control, maybe even more rewards.
That's the idea.
What about from the company's perspective?
From the company's side,
Why would they want to become an exempted establishment?
well, there's definitely a certain level of prestige, I guess you could say.
Oh, interesting.
It shows they're committed to their employees, they're financially stable.
Yeah, makes sense. And practically, they get more control over how the fund is administered.
Okay, more flexibility.
Right. They can potentially tailor the scheme to fit their employees' needs better.
I see. So maybe aligning it with their industry or something.
Exactly.
But there has to be a downside, right? It can't all be sunshine and roses.
Oh, of course not. With more control comes more responsibility.
Yeah. Yes.
Exempted establishments have a whole bunch of compliance obligations.
Okay, like what?
Well, they have to stick to all the conditions in the EPF scheme, including investment guidelines.
Uh-huh.
They need to file those monthly and annual returns religiously,
No missing deadlines.
and they're subject to regular audits, making sure everything's above board.
So it's like they're guardians of their employees' futures.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of accountability there. So if a company wants to go for this exemption thing, how do they even start?
It's a process.
Like an application.
Yeah, like applying to a very exclusive club. They go through a formal application process involving the regional and zonal EPFO offices.
Oh, okay.
They need to prove their proposed scheme is as good as or better than the standard one.
Show they're up to the task.
Exactly. Financial stability, investment strategy, commitment to employee benefits, the whole 9 yards.
So, a lot of scrutiny.
Should be.
What happens once they're in? Who makes sure they're following the rules?
That's where the EPFO comes in. They're the watchdog, monitoring these establishments.
Okay, like oversight.
Right. They conduct regular compliance audits, making sure everything's running as it should.
That's not just a one-time thing.
Not at all. It's ongoing.
Now, what if a company decides they don't want to be exempt anymore?
That can happen. There's cancellation of exemption.
Yeah.
That's usually if they're not following the rules.
Or if they have financial issues.
Exactly. It involves show cause notices, transferring all the funds back to the EPFO.
Not a good situation.
No.
But what if they just want to go back to the traditional way?
That's surrender of exemption.
Okay, so that's voluntary.
Right. They decide to give up their exempt status. It's a smoother process, transferring the funds back, making sure the transition is smooth for employees.
Like a managed exit.
Exactly.
We've talked a lot about rules, but what about audits?
Oh, audits are key.
Yeah.
We've got two main types: third-party audits and compliance audits.
Okay, break that down for us.
Third-party audits are usually done by independent chartered accountants.
So bring in an outside perspective.
Right, especially when an establishment is surrendering their exemption or facing cancellation, it's an impartial assessment.
Makes sense. What about compliance audits?
Those are done by the EPFO themselves.
Okay, their own team.
They're making sure exempted establishments are sticking to those conditions we talked about.
They're checking everything.
Everything, remittances, claim settlements, investments, the whole 9 yards.
It's a thorough checkup.
It has to be.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The history, what an exempted establishment is, the benefits, the obligations, the audits.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But understanding this helps you make better decisions about your financial future.
Absolutely. Whether you're thinking about joining an exempted establishment or just want to be a more informed employee.
Now, before we wrap up this part, let's look at how this exemption process actually works. Because the details, they matter.
They really do.
There are specific conditions a company has to meet just to be eligible.
Oh yeah, it's not easy.
They don't just hand these exemptions out.
Not at all.
Tell me more about these conditions.
Well, one big one is they need a Provident Fund scheme with at least 50 crore rupees in their members' accounts.
50 crore rupees.
That's a lot of money.
That's serious. They want to make sure these trusts are stable.
Exactly, and they need a positive net worth for 3 years before applying.
So they're looking at consistent financial health.
Absolutely, and they also need to be tech savvy. One condition is having the Aadhaar number for every member in their account.
Aadhaar, that's India's biometric ID system, right?
Right, so it's about streamlining things, making it more secure.
And more accurate, I bet.
Yeah, they also want online claim settlements, an online portal for grievance resolution.
So it's not just money, it's modern practices.
User-friendly, accessible for employees.
I see why these conditions are so thorough.
Oh, and there's more.
More.
Appendix A to Para 27 AA of the EPF scheme, 1952.
Okay, we need to unpack that. But let's save it for the next part of our deep dive. Because there's much more to learn about this whole world of EPF exemptions.
Definitely.
Stick with us.
We'll be right back. It's kind of fascinating how much this system balances flexibility with all these rules. We talked about the big conditions for exemption. With Appendix A, that's where things get really specific.
Okay, so Appendix A, what kind of specifics are we talking about here? Give us the inside scoop.
It covers, well, pretty much everything. Composition of the board of trustees, their responsibilities, obligations of both the establishment and the employees, even the nitty-gritty of like interest rates and investment guidelines.
So it's not enough to just have a trust. You got to run it right, with everyone's interests protected.
Exactly, yeah. These documents are dense for a reason.
I'm starting to see that.
So take the board of trustees, for instance, often called the BOT.
Right.
They're the ones making the decisions about the Provident Fund. Appendix A says they have to meet at least once every 3 months.
So not just a rubber stamp.
No, not at all. They're analyzing the fund's performance, dealing with any issues, making those big decisions.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is. What about the establishment itself? What do they have to do under these conditions?
Yeah, what are their big obligations?
First and foremost, they have to make sure every single eligible employee is enrolled in the Provident Fund scheme.
No exceptions.
No exception. It's about providing that safety net for everyone.
That makes sense. Full coverage.
Exactly. And then there are the contributions, right?
From both sides, employer and employee.
Right, both employer and employee. Those contributions have to be in the trust's account by the 15th of every month. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Strict deadline.
Very strict. And here's something interesting. If the trust has losses, let's say from a bad investment,
Uh-oh.
guess who's legally obligated to cover those losses?
The establishment.
The establishment. They have to step in and protect the employee's savings, so it's not like they can just sit back and relax. They're really invested, no pun intended, in making sure this fund succeeds.
That's a big responsibility, but it makes sense. You want your employer to be that committed. Now, what about the employees in all this? What are their rights under these exemption conditions?
They're not just along for the ride. Appendix A outlines some important rights for them, like the right to a time-bound settlement of claims, so they don't have to wait forever to get their money when they need it.
Which is a big deal, especially when it's retirement savings we're talking about.
Absolutely. And the conditions say trusts have to provide passbook facilities so employees can track their savings, just like a bank account.
Okay, like a statement.
And of course, lots of trusts these days also have online access for checking your balance.
So transparency and convenience, it seems like.
That's the goal. Employees should be able to keep an eye on their financial future.
Now, earlier you mentioned investment guidelines. Appendix A probably gets into the details there.
Oh, it definitely does. We're talking about retirement funds here. Safety and security are top priority. The guidelines mandate that all investments have to follow the rules set by the government of India.
So no risky business with people's retirement. Got it. So what are those guidelines? Where can they invest?
A big chunk of the funds has to go into government securities.
Those are considered pretty safe, right?
Yeah, they're low risk, backed by the government, provides a stable base for the fund.
Okay, so like building a house on solid ground.
Exactly. But they can diversify a bit, invest in some debt instruments like bonds from reputable institutions.
But there are limits, right?
Oh yeah, there are caps on how much can go into those slightly riskier assets. It's about finding that balance, aiming for good returns, but also preserving the capital.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Exactly. Now, how are these investments actually held and managed?
Yeah, how does that all work?
Well, Appendix A says all securities have to be in dematerialized form, or DMAT for short.
DMAT. Okay, for those of us who don't speak finance, break that down.
Think of it like an online bank account, but for your investments. No more physical certificates, everything's electronic.
Okay, so smoother transactions, more secure, easier to track.
Exactly. It's about modernizing the system, keeping things transparent, seeing a pattern here.
Transparency, accountability, security. Sounds like those are the pillars of this whole system.
You got it. And Appendix A really lays out a strong framework balancing autonomy for the establishments with enough oversight to protect employees.
Yeah, it's clear they have to be very careful, follow the rules exactly.
Absolutely.
We mentioned the exempted return manual earlier. Sounds like that's got important info for these establishments.
Oh, it's crucial. It's like the instruction manual for filing those returns. And remember, transparency is key here.
Right, making sure everyone's on the same page. I bet those returns can get pretty complex.
They can be, but the manual helps you through it. It gives detailed instructions, field by field, so there's no confusion. It's like a paint by numbers for filing those returns.
Okay, so it holds your hand to the process.
Pretty much.
But what if mistakes happen? Even with all that guidance.
They've thought of that. The manual has procedures for correcting errors. There's even a delete part function, so you can reset data for a specific section if you messed up.
Okay, so it's user-friendly, but still focused on accuracy.
It has to be both.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot of information to handle.
It is. And one thing that really stands out in this manual is the emphasis on electronic filing.
Makes things easier, I'm sure.
Way easier. That shift to electronic returns back in 2003, that was huge.
I bet it saved a ton of paper.
And time. The exempted return manual is all about that digital shift. It even tells you step by step how to generate those PDF reports.
So it's like a digital guide for the whole process.
Exactly. Now, we've talked about Appendix A, the exempted return manual, but there's another key document, the SOP for Management and Regulation of EPF Exemption. This one gives you the big picture.
Okay, the big picture, what's that all about?
It starts by reminding us what this exemption system is really for. Giving establishments more flexibility in managing those funds, BUT, and this is a big but,
Big but.
the employee benefits have to be at least as good as the standard EPF scheme. No compromises.
Right, that's the core of it all.
It is, and the SOP gets into the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved. The establishment, the employer, the EPFO, everyone's got a part to play.
It's like a team effort.
It is, and it doesn't just talk about roles, it lays out specific procedures. How to grant exemptions, how to do those compliance audits, how to surrender exemptions.
Like a step-by-step guide.
Exactly, a blueprint for how the whole thing works. No room for ambiguity.
Clarity, efficiency, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. It's all about those core principles, efficiency, transparency, accountability.
Keep coming up again and again.
They're essential. The SOP makes that very clear with timelines, clear procedures, no guesswork.
Okay, so we've explored a lot today. The Exemption Division Manual, the Exempted Return Manual, this SOP. It's clear these documents are essential for anyone dealing with EPF exemptions.
No question about it. We've gone from the basics to the nitty-gritty details.
And hopefully our listeners are feeling more informed.
They should be. They now have the knowledge to understand how this system works and how it might affect their own financial future.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to retirement planning. But our deep dive isn't over yet. There's one more document, the Compliance Audit Pro Forma. This is where we see the EPFO making sure those exempted establishments are following the rules.
Yes, the Compliance Audit Pro Forma. This one really gets into the details of what the auditors are looking for, the standards, the consequences of any missteps. It's all about making sure those exemptions are working as intended.
That sounds like a topic for a whole other deep dive. So let's take a break here and we'll come back to dissect the Compliance Audit Pro Forma in the next part of our episode. Okay, so the Compliance Audit Pro Forma, just the word audit kind of makes me nervous.
I get that it's like a exam time for companies.
Right, but you said it's more like a checkup to make sure things are okay.
Exactly, a little preventative care.
Okay, that's better. So what is this Compliance Audit Pro Forma really?
It's the EPFO auditor's playbook, basically.
Yeah.
It tells them exactly what to look at during those compliance audits, make sure the approach is consistent and thorough.
Like a checklist, making sure they cover everything.
You got it. No stone unturned.
Okay, so what are they really scrutinizing?
Top of the list, remittances. They want to make absolutely sure those contributions from both the employee and employer are being transferred to the trust on time, in full, no messing around.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those contributions are what build those retirement funds.
Right, the lifeblood of the whole thing.
That's it.
And they also look closely at claim settlements.
Making sure people get what they're owed when they need it.
Exactly. No unnecessary delays or hurdles. And to keep things transparent, they check those annual account slips that employees get.
Those statements.
Right, making sure the information is accurate, complete, easy to understand.
No hiding behind complicated language.
No way. It's all about clarity for the employee. They also dig into enrollment procedures, making sure everyone who's eligible is actually enrolled in the scheme.
So no one's slipping through the cracks.
Right, and they double check that the establishment is following all those strict exemption conditions we talked about. Oh, and of course the interest rate being credited to those accounts.
That's a big one.
Uh-huh.
You want your savings to be growing.
Absolutely. They confirm that trusts are meeting or beating that statutory rate set by the government, making sure employees are getting a fair return.
Okay, so we've got remittances, claims, enrollment, interest rates. That's a lot. What about the investment guidelines?
Well, those are part of it too, for sure. Remember, low-risk investments, government securities.
Yeah, playing it safe.
The auditors go through the trust's entire investment portfolio, making sure everything aligns with those guidelines.
Making sure they're not gambling with people's retirement.
Exactly. And they look at how the trust raises funds to cover those necessary expenses, like paying out claims, making sure it's all done responsibly, sustainably.
Balancing today's needs with the fund's future.
Right, that's the key. And one thing that's interesting about this pro forma is that it goes beyond just the finances. It considers employee benefits more broadly.
Oh, so it's not just about the numbers.
Not at all. For example, they check if establishments are automatically incorporating any amendments to the EPF scheme that benefit employees, even if those amendments haven't been formally added to the trust's rules yet.
So they have to stay up to date, even if it means going above and beyond the paperwork.
Exactly. And they also look at things like whether employees have access to computer terminals to check their balances, whether those passbooks are being issued on time, how strong the grievance resolution mechanisms are.
They're really focused on making sure employees have access to the full range of benefits.
That's the goal. So these compliance audits, they're not just about ticking boxes. They're about evaluating how well the system is working overall, especially for the employees.
It's a holistic view.
You could say that. And of course, the pro forma lays out what happens if they find violations. There are consequences.
Right, there have to be. Or what's the point?
It wouldn't be very effective, would it? The pro forma lists a bunch of actions, from warnings for minor things to financial penalties or even legal action in more serious cases.
So, the punishment fits the crime.
Yeah, it all comes back to accountability. Exempted establishments get flexibility, but they also have to follow those regulations and protect their employees' interests.
So we've covered a lot today. The history of EPF exemptions, those detailed conditions, the manuals, the audits, even the pro forma.
We've gone deep.
We have. Hopefully our listeners are feeling more informed and empowered to engage with the system, whether they're employees, employers, or just want to learn more about it.
That's what we hope for.
It's complex, but it's important.
It affects people's futures, their retirement.
So, there you have it. Our deep dive into the world of EPF exemptions in India. We've broken down the complex, looked at the essential, and hopefully giving you the knowledge to navigate this world with confidence.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning. That's what it's all about.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're going to untangle this whole Indian Employees Provident Fund thing, the 1952 Act.
Yeah, the EPF and MP Act, if you want to get technical.
Right, exactly. We want to figure out how organizations get to manage their own provident fund trusts. It's pretty interesting when you get into it. We've been poring over all these documents, SOPs, application forms.
All that good stuff.
Yeah. So, before we get lost in the weeds, can we back up for a sec? What is this EPF and MP Act anyway? Why should anyone even care?
Think of it like the foundation of Social Security, for Indian employees. This act sets the rules for all these provident funds and pensions and even like insurance benefits. It's all about making sure people have some financial security down the line when they retire or if something unexpected happens.
Okay, that makes sense. But we're kind of focusing on those organizations that do things a little differently, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's where Section 17 comes in. It's this part of the act that lets certain organizations set up and manage their own provident fund trusts. They're separate from the standard EPF scheme that's run by the government.
So it's like they get to design a custom retirement plan for their employees.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. Some organizations feel like they can manage those funds better, or maybe they can offer better returns than the standard scheme. And some might want more flexibility, to attract talent with a really unique benefits package.
That sounds pretty good, actually. But I'm sure there are, some catches, right?
Of course. It's not a total free-for-all. Organizations with this exemption, they still have to follow a bunch of regulations, and they got to make sure that the benefits are at least as good as the standard scheme, if not better. That's where it gets interesting.
All right, so let's break down this whole exemption process.
Yeah.
Where does an organization even begin?
Well, first off, you got to understand that there are two types of exemptions. We've got Section 17(1), which covers the entire organization, and then there's Section 17(2), and that one's more about exemptions for specific groups of employees within an organization.
Oh, so a company could exempt all its employees, or just say the marketing department or something? That's kind of wild. What's the actual process like?
So the journey begins with an application, right? The organization, we call it the establishment, they got to submit this application, and their first point of contact is it's the Regional Provident Fund Commissioner.
Oh, the RPFC.
Exactly. They're like the first gatekeeper in this whole process. They got to make sure everything's in order.
Okay, got it. So RPFC, first hurdle. Now, how about paperwork? Are we talking like mountains of forms?
Well, there are definitely a few forms involved, yeah. They've got this whole series they use, GE1, GE2, all the way to GE5. Each one has its own specific purpose. So, for example, that first one, Form GE1, that's your initial application. It's got all the basic details about the organization, their finances, their proposed trust rules, even proof that their employees are okay with this whole thing.
Employee consent. Yeah, that seems pretty important.
Oh, absolutely. Organizations can't just decide to do this on their own. They got to show that their employees are on board.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah.
So once the RPFC gets this like massive application, what happens then? Do they just stamp it approved and call it a day?
Oh, no, definitely not. Remember all those regulations we talked about? The RPFC, they have to check if the organization meets like 16 specific conditions to even qualify for this exemption.
16. Wow.
They have this big checklist they go through. They look at things like the composition of the board of trustees, making sure it's balanced and all, making sure contributions are paid on time, following strict investment guidelines. It's pretty thorough.
Okay, so the RPFC really scrutinizes everything. But are they the final decision makers?
Not quite. Once the RPFC is satisfied, they send the application up the chain. Next stop, the zonal office. Of course, they include their own recommendations and all that.
So another level of review. What exactly happens at the zonal office?
Well, they do their own evaluation, right? Add their own recommendations to the file, and then they send it all the way up to the head office.
Well, the head office is where the final decision gets made.
It is. That's where the application lands on the desk of the Additional Central Provident Fund Commissioner, or ACC. They're part of the exemption division at head office.
Right, the ACC.
Yeah. The ACC looks at everything from the financial details to the fine print of the trust rules. It's a pretty comprehensive check.
It already sounds like quite a process. Does the ACC make the final call then?
Not quite. The ACC's review, it goes to the Exempted Establishments Committee, the EEC.
Okay, so another acronym to keep track of. What does this EEC do?
Think of them as like an advisory board. They analyze the application, they discuss the pros and cons, and they make their recommendations to the big guys. The Central Board of Trustees, the CBT.
So the CBT, that's like the Supreme Court of this whole thing.
Yeah, pretty much. The CBT reviews the EEC's recommendation, and they're the ones who make the final decision.
Wow, it's a long road to get this exemption. So what happens after an organization gets the green light? Are they free from any more oversight?
Oh no, not at all. Remember, the goal is to protect those employees. The system's got to make sure everyone's treated fairly, even in these exempted organizations. So there's a whole system of monitoring and reporting just to make sure those organizations stick to the rules.
So even after they get the exemption, they still have to prove they're playing by the rules. What does that involve, this monitoring?
We're talking regular reviews, audits, even inspections. The regional office plays a big part in that, keeping an eye on things in their area. The organizations, they have to keep really detailed records of all their financial transactions. They file reports with the EPFO, and they have to be ready for those inspections.
Sounds like a lot of responsibility, but it's all about protecting those employee benefits, right?
Exactly. Whether an organization uses that standard scheme or manages their own provident fund trust, the whole point of the EPF and MP Act is to make sure employees have that safety net for the future.
This has been quite a journey already. We started with, what the EPF and MP Act even is, and now we're talking about how organizations get these exemptions and everything. What else is there?
Oh, we've only scratched the surface. There's still a lot to unpack, like those 16 conditions we mentioned for the exemption, and all the specific rules about these trusts. For instance, did you know that organizations actually have to transfer all past accumulations, like from before they got the exemption, in cash, not securities? And they got to do it within 30 days.
Really? Cash. That's interesting. Why cash?
Well, stick around and we'll dive into all those details. That cash transfer rule, it's actually pretty fascinating when you think about it.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, it's all about protecting the employees, during that transition. When an organization gets this exemption, they're basically taking charge of money that used to be with the EPFO. So transferring it in cash, it makes sure that new trust has the money right away so they can meet their obligations to those employees.
Yeah.
No waiting around.
Oh, I see. So it's like making sure the trust isn't starting from scratch. Okay, that makes sense. So once the organization is managing its own trust, what are the rules then? Like, what regulations do they have to follow?
Well, remember those trust rules we talked about?
Yeah.
Those are super important. They're like the rule book for the whole Provident Fund Trust. They outline everything, how the trust is managed, what benefits employees get.
And I'm guessing those trust rules, they have to be approved, right, to make sure they're up to par.
Absolutely. The regional office, those gatekeepers we talked about,
Yeah.
they review the trust rules very carefully. They have to make sure everything complies with the law. One of the key things they're looking for is something called benefit equivalence.
Benefit equivalence,
Yeah.
okay. That sounds important, but what does it actually mean?
Basically, it means the benefits that the trust offers, they have to be at least as good as what employees would get under the standard EPF scheme. The regional office actually does a side-by-side comparison. They look at retirement benefits, withdrawal options, even the interest rates. They're there to protect those employees, make sure they're not getting a worse deal just because their company decided to go with this exemption.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So there are safeguards to keep companies from, taking advantage of their employees.
Exactly.
What if an organization wants to change their trust rules after they've been approved? Can they just, do that whenever they want?
Not at all, no. Any changes they want to make, they have to go back to the Regional Provident Fund Commissioner for approval. The organization has to explain why they need to make those changes. It all has to be very transparent. And again, it's about protecting those employees.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's a lot of emphasis on accountability in this process, it seems like. It's not just about giving organizations freedom, but making sure they're using it responsibly.
Exactly. And speaking of responsibility, we should talk about the Board of Trustees.
Right.
They play a huge role in managing these Provident Fund trusts.
Remind me, who's on the Board of Trustees again?
It's a mix of people from the employer's side and the employee side, and that's important.
Oh, I see.
Because it means both sides have a say in how the trust is run. It's like a balance of power.
That makes sense.
The board is responsible for all sorts of things. They decide how the funds are invested. They make sure employee claims are processed. Lots of responsibilities.
Speaking of investments, I'm guessing there are rules about where that money can be invested, right?
Yeah.
They can't just put it all in risky stocks or something.
You're right, there are definitely rules. The government sets guidelines for how these trusts can invest. It's about finding that balance between risk and reward, making sure that money is managed responsibly for the long term.
So no gambling at all away in Vegas.
Haha, right. It's got to be carefully considered. Most of those funds have to be invested in safe things like government securities to protect those retirement savings.
Right. So it sounds like all of this requires a lot of record keeping.
Oh, absolutely. Meticulous record keeping is crucial. Exempted organizations, they have to keep track of every single financial transaction, every contribution, every withdrawal, every investment decision, everything. And they have to be ready to show those records to the EPFO auditors whenever they come knocking.
Wow. So this exemption comes with a lot of responsibility, that's for sure.
It does, but it's all about making sure that those employees have access to their retirement savings when they need them. That's the ultimate goal. Whether it's through the standard scheme or one of these trusts, it's about providing that safety net for India's workforce.
Let's go back to those trust rules for a minute. We talked about benefit equivalence, but what other specifics do they have to include?
The trust rules are really comprehensive. They cover things like contribution rates, the process for handling withdrawals and advances, even the administrative costs of running the trust. Everything has to be laid out clearly.
So it's like the blueprint for how the whole trust operates.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, those rules aren't set in stone forever. If laws change or if the EPF scheme is modified, those trust rules might need to be updated too, especially if the changes are good for employees.
It's a constantly evolving system then.
In a way, yeah. And that's why that monitoring is so important. The authorities have to make sure these trusts are keeping up with the times and fulfilling their purpose.
This whole exemption thing, it's kind of a balancing act, isn't it? Well, you've got the organization's interests on one side. They want flexibility and maybe better returns.
Okay.
But then you have to balance that with protecting the employees, making sure their benefits are secure.
You're absolutely right. It's a delicate balance, and that's why the standard operating procedure, the SOP, is so important. It provides that framework for how it all works. It lays out the roles and responsibilities for everyone involved.
Yeah, the SOP. Speaking of which, I'm realizing now just how involved the EPFO is in all of this. It's not just about approving or rejecting those applications. It's about actively monitoring and regulating these trusts.
Oh, for sure. They're the guardians of the whole system, making sure everything operates fairly and effectively. And they've got a lot of tools to do that. They do regular inspections. They can impose penalties if organizations aren't following the rules. They can even revoke that exemption altogether.
So there are real consequences if an organization isn't playing by the rules.
Absolutely. They can't just get that exemption and then do whatever they want. The EPFO is there to make sure everyone's following the rules and that those employees are protected.
This has been really eye-opening. The EPF and MP Act and this whole exemption process, it's a lot more complex than I initially thought.
Yeah, it can be pretty intricate.
We've covered so much ground, from the basics of the Act to all those details about how the exemptions work, the Board of Trustees, the trust rules. It's amazing how much goes into this.
And we're not done yet.
Really?
Yeah, we've still got to get into some of those specific procedures and forms that make this whole system tick. Remember those forms, the GE1 through GE5? We should take a closer look at what each one entails.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's start with Form GE1. We know it's that initial application, but what exactly does it require?
Well, get ready to dive even deeper because in our final part, we'll uncover the practicalities of this exemption process.
Okay, so last time, we were about to dig into these forms, the GE1 through GE5.
Right, the ones that make this whole process actually happen.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's start with Form GE1, that initial application. What kind of info are we talking about here?
So GE1, it's all about getting a complete picture of the organization that's asking for the exemption. You know, the basics, like their name, address, PAN number.
Yeah.
But it goes deeper than that. They need details about their structure, how many employees they have, all that. And specifics about the proposed trust, like who are the trustees, what's their background. It's pretty in-depth.
So it's not just a quick fill-in-the-blanks kind of thing.
Not at all. The organization really has to show they're serious about this.
What about the financial stuff? I imagine that's a big part of it.
Oh, definitely. They need to provide detailed financial statements, balance sheets, profit and loss statements. You know, the regional office wants to make sure this organization is stable, that they can actually manage those employee funds responsibly.
Makes sense. It's a big responsibility to be handling people's retirement money.
It is.
Anything else that's like really important in Form GE1?
One thing that stands out is they need to show that their employees actually agree to this whole thing. You know, they need documentation of employee consent.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that.
It's not just a decision made by the higher-ups. The employees need to be on board.
Makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, so we've got Form GE1 down. What's next in this whole process?
All right, so after the regional office goes through that initial application, that's where Form GE2 comes in.
GE2.
Think of it like the regional office's report card on the organization.
Okay, interesting.
It summarizes everything they found and what they recommend to the zonal office.
So they're passing the baton, basically. What kind of things are in that report?
All sorts of stuff. They analyze the organization's finances. They look at those proposed trust rules. They also have to confirm that the organization meets all those 16 conditions for exemption.
Right, those 16 conditions. It's all coming back now.
You know, things like the board of trustees, making sure the contributions are paid on time, those investment patterns.
Yeah.
It's a pretty detailed summary.
Okay, and then it goes to the zonal office.
Right. And at the zonal office, they use Form GE3 to add their own review and recommendations. It's like another layer of checks and balances, you know, to make sure nothing slips through the cracks.
It's a pretty thorough system, it seems like. So eventually a decision has to be made. Is that where GE4 comes in?
Yes. Form GE4 is the official communication from the Central Board of Trustees.
The CBT.
Right, to the government. It could be the central government or the state government, depending on the organization.
Okay.
And this form, it tells them the CBT's decision, whether they've been approved or rejected, and any specific conditions that go along with that.
So that's the final word. But even then, it's not really over, is it? There's still that monitoring process we talked about.
You're exactly right. And that brings us to Form GE5.
GE5.
This one's all about tracking how well the organization is doing, you know, making sure they're following the rules. Both the regional and zonal offices, they use this form to keep tabs on things. They check if contributions are being paid on time, if they're sticking to the trust rules, the investment guidelines, all of that.
So even after they get that exemption, it's not like they can just forget about everything.
Yeah.
They're constantly being checked up on.
It's about accountability, right?
Right.
The EPFO wants to make sure these exemptions are actually doing what they're supposed to do.
Which is?
Making sure employees have a secure retirement fund. That's the whole point.
This has been so informative. I had no idea how much was involved in all of this.
It's a pretty fascinating system when you get into the details.
It is. So we've covered those forms, the GE1 through 5. We've talked about the whole application process, the roles of everyone involved, those trust rules, the oversight from the EPFO.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I just want to go back to that one thing about transferring the past accumulations in cash.
Oh, yeah.
Why cash specifically? What's the thinking there?
Well, it comes down to making sure that transition goes smoothly, when the organization takes over management of those funds.
Right.
Having it in cash means the new trust has the money right away, so there are no delays in getting things set up and running.
Oh, I see. So it's about protecting the employees, making sure their money is available when they need it.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about these EPF and MP Act exemptions.
It's a lot to take in, but it's important stuff.
It is. So now you know how this whole system works, the responsibilities involved, how the EPFO keeps everything in check.
And if you're interested in learning more, there's tons of information online. You can find the whole EPF and MP Act, those SOP documents we talked about. It's all out there.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore.